My family thought they had stolen my grandmother's fortune, leaving me with nothing but a dusty attic and a collection of snow globes. They never imagined one of those tiny glass worlds held the key to their undoing. The lawyer's office smelled of old paper and stale coffee, a scent I'll forever associate with betrayal. My Aunt Carol sat across the polished mahogany table, dabbing at her dry eyes with a pristine handkerchief. My Uncle Mark was next to her, patting her hand with a somber expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. And my cousin Brian, the golden boy, just looked bored, scrolling on his phone beneath the table. They were playing their parts beautifully, the grieving family. I was just the unwanted audience. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been the sun my world orbited around. She wasn't a typical grandma who baked cookies and knitted sweaters. She was a whirlwind of stories about traveling the world, a collector of strange and beautiful things, and the only person who ever truly saw me. While the rest of the family saw me as the artistic one, which was their polite term for future financial failure, Grandma Eleanor saw a kindred spirit. We'd spend hours in her dusty attic, poring over old maps and talking about constellations. She taught me how to read the stars, not just the real ones, but the secret ones she said were hidden in plain sight. "Most people look, Alex," she'd say, her eyes twinkling, "but they never truly see." Now she was gone, and the family was finally getting what they'd been waiting for, her estate. They had always been obsessed with her wealth, whispering about trusts and investments, treating her beautiful, memory-filled house like a future real estate listing. I knew they resented my closeness with her. Carol once told me with a syrupy sweet smile that it was inappropriate for me to take up so much of a sick old woman's time. Sick? Grandma was sharp as a tack until the very end. The lawyer, a man with a face like a tired bulldog, cleared his throat. And now we come to the final bequests of Eleanor Vance. My heart hammered against my ribs. Grandma had always promised she'd take care of me. "Don't you worry about them, Starlight," she'd whisper, ruffling my hair. "I've made sure you'll have the freedom to chase all the constellations you want." I watched Aunt Carol's lips tighten into a smug little line. The lawyer continued. The house, the stocks, the portfolio, it all went to Carol and Mark, to be managed for the good of the family. Brian was gifted a trust fund that made my jaw clench. Then the bulldog lawyer looked at me over the top of his spectacles. "To my grandson, Alex," he read, his voice monotone. "I leave the contents of the attic, and my sincere hope that he finds something of value amongst the dust. I also bequeath to him my collection of snow globes to remind him that entire worlds can exist in the smallest of places. The attic and snow globes. That was it. A wave of cold shock washed over me, so intense I felt dizzy. It was a joke, a cruel, dismissive joke. I could feel Brian's smirk burning into the side of my face. Aunt Carol's performance kicked into high gear. "Oh, Alex, honey," she cooed, reaching across the table. "You know how she was in the end. Her mind, it wasn't what it used to be. We tried to get her to update things, to be more fair. But she was so stubborn. Her lie was so blatant, so perfectly delivered, it was almost impressive. Her mind wasn't what it used to be." I had been with Grandma the week before she passed. We played a game of chess, and she beat me in 12 moves, just like always. Her mind was a fortress. This wasn't the work of a fading mind. This was the work of a viper. This was Carol's doing. She must have pressured her, manipulated her, gotten her to sign something when she was weak or medicated. I didn't say a word. I just stood up, the legs of my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I walked out without looking back, the sound of Carol's fake sympathy following me down the hall. The next day, I had to go to the house. Carol had given me 48 hours to clear out my things before the estate sale planners arrived. Walking into Grandma's home was like a physical blow. The air was still thick with her scent, lavender and old books, but it felt hollow, empty. I trudged up the creaking stairs to the attic. the place that was supposed to be my inheritance. It was filled with dusty trunks, forgotten furniture, and boxes of my childhood drawings that Grandma had meticulously saved. It was worthless to them, but it was everything to me. I spent hours just sitting on an old trunk, breathing in the memories. Then I saw them. Lined up on a dusty shelf was the snow globe collection, about 20 of them, from all over the world. Paris, Tokyo, Cairo. I picked one up, a little scene of London. I gave it a shake, watching the fake snow swirl around a tiny Big Ben. It felt so dismissive, so unlike her. This wasn't my grandma. I was about to pack them into a box when I noticed something odd. One of the globes was different. It wasn't a city. It was a simple, dark globe with a single, beautifully crafted miniature of an old-fashioned observatory, the kind with a domed roof. There was no label on the base. I'd never seen it before. Out of curiosity, I picked it up. It was heavier than the others. I turned it over, and on the felt bottom, I saw a tiny, almost invisible inscription, written in my grandmother's familiar, elegant script. It wasn't a location. It was a phrase. Our phrase. The one she'd say when we looked through her telescope on clear nights. Where the bear sleeps, the hunter aims his arrow. My breath hitched. It was a riddle, a clue from one of our secret star maps. The bear was Ursa Major, the Big Dipper. The hunter was Orion. His arrow points directly at the star Sirius. She used to call it the dog star or the hearth star because she said it was the brightest, warmest light to guide you home. My eyes scanned the attic wildly. What was she trying to tell me? The hearth, the fireplace. The attic didn't have one, but her study downstairs did. The one place nobody ever went into because it was too cluttered. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I practically flew down the stairs, ignoring the boxes and the dust sheets. I burst into the study, a room dominated by a huge, cold stone fireplace. It hadn't been used in years. I knelt before it, my hands running over the cold stones, the ornate iron grate. Nothing. No loose bricks, no hidden levers. Disappointment crashed over me. Was I just seeing things? Desperate, I looked around the room. My gaze fell upon the mantelpiece. Sitting right in the center, almost like a spotlight was on it, was her antique brass telescope. It was aimed directly at the wall above the fireplace, but it wasn't aimed at anything, just a faded floral wallpaper. Look, but never truly see, her voice echoed in my head. My hands were shaking as I walked over to the telescope. I wiped the dust from the lens and peered through the eyepiece. The powerful lens magnified the wallpaper, turning the faded floral pattern into a blurry mess. But then I adjusted the focus, twisting the knob slowly, and the blur sharpened. Hidden within the intricate pattern of vines and roses were impossibly tiny, almost microscopic engravings of stars. And there, right in the center of my view, was a perfect tiny rendering of the constellation Canis Major, with a brilliantly etched Sirius at its heart. I took a deep breath and moved away from the telescope, my eyes fixed on that exact spot on the wall. It looked like nothing, just wallpaper. I reached out and pressed my fingers against the image of the star. For a second, nothing happened. Then I felt it. A tiny give. A faint mechanical click that echoed in the silent room. A thin, almost invisible seam appeared in the wallpaper, and a section of the wall, about 3 feet square, slowly began to grind inwards. The grinding protest of stone on stone filled the silence as the panel receded into the wall. A cool, musty draft washed over me, carrying the scent of sealed-off time, of paper and leather and secrets. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. It was real. This wasn't a grief-induced fantasy. My grandmother, my brilliant, clever grandmother, had left me a map. With a shaking hand, I pulled my phone from my pocket and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small, stone-lined space, no bigger than a walk-in closet. It was her secret vault. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, and I fumbled for a switch on the wall beside the opening. A warm yellow light flickered on, illuminating the room. It wasn't filled with gold bars or stacks of cash. It was better. It was her. Against the far wall was a small antique writing desk. On it sat a tarnished silver box and a single thick envelope of heavy cream-colored parchment. My name, Alex, was written on the front in her unmistakable swirling script. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal, a perfect impression of a compass rose. The letter inside was several pages long, and her words felt like a warm hand on my shoulder. "My dearest Starlight," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you were clever enough to see, just as I always knew you would. I am so sorry for the cruel trick I had to play, but I hope you will understand it was born not of malice, but of desperation and a deep, abiding love." My eyes blurred with tears as I read on. She explained everything. She knew Carol and Mark were circling like vultures. She knew they'd been pressuring her for years, trying to get her to sign over power of attorney, trying to isolate her from me. In her final months, they had become relentless. They'd brought in their own lawyer, a man she called a weasel in a cheap suit, and had essentially forced her to sign a new will under duress, threatening to have her declared incompetent if she refused. "But they underestimated us, Alex," she wrote. "They see the world in dollars and cents. They don't see the constellations hidden in the wallpaper. The will they read to you is a phantom, a piece of paper designed to satisfy their greed and send them on their way, a ghost to haunt an empty house. My true legacy and your true inheritance was never something they could comprehend, let alone find." My breath hitched. The letter instructed me to look inside the silver box on the desk. It wasn't locked. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not jewelry but a set of old ornate skeleton keys and another smaller envelope. This one contained a key to a safe deposit box at a bank I'd never heard of, and a single folded document. I carefully unfolded it. It was thick, official paper, bound with a blue ribbon. At the top, in crisp, legal type, were the words, "The last will and testament of Eleanor Vance." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely read it. It was dated just 1 month before she passed, signed by her and witnessed by 2 people I recognized as her oldest and most trusted friends, her chess partner and her gardener. It was ironclad. In this will, the real will, she left a few token amounts to Carol, Mark, and Brian, enough so they cannot contest this on the grounds of being forgotten, she had written in her letter. But the rest, the house, the portfolio, the controlling interest in her investments, she left it all to me. She had entrusted me to be the steward of her life's work, to preserve the home she loved, and to have the freedom she had always promised me. I sank into the little desk chair, the will clutched in my hand, a wave of vindication and profound love washing over me. She hadn't abandoned me. She had protected me. She had trusted me. This whole thing was her final, grandest adventure for us to share. A loud slam from downstairs shattered the sacred silence of the vault. The front door. My blood turned to ice. "Will just be a minute." Aunt Carol's sharp voice echoed up the stairwell. "I just want to make sure Alex hasn't made a complete mess of the place." Panic seized me. They couldn't find this. Not now. I scrambled, shoving the will and the letter back into the silver box, my movements clumsy and loud in the small space. I looked at the wall opening. The mechanism had been slow to open. It would be just as slow to close. I jabbed the star on the wallpaper, and with a low groan, the stone panel began to slide back into place. It was agonizingly slow. I could hear their footsteps on the stairs, Mark complaining about the dust. I darted out of the study just as the panel clicked shut, leaving no trace it had ever been open. I tried to compose myself, to look mournful and dejected, as Aunt Carol appeared at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of false concern. "Oh, you're still here, dear," she said, her eyes sweeping the hallway. "Finding anything of value?" The word dripped with condescension. "Just memories," I mumbled, gesturing vaguely toward the attic. "Lots of boxes to go through." She gave a tight little nod. "Well, try to be quick about it. The appraisers are coming tomorrow morning." She and Mark took one last proprietary look around before turning to leave. I leaned against the doorframe of the study, my heart still trying to beat its way out of my chest, listening as their footsteps receded and the front door closed once more. Silence. I was safe. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for a full minute. A shaky laugh escaped my lips. They had no idea I had won. My grandmother and we had won. I turned back toward the study, a triumphant grin spreading across my face. I glanced at the mantelpiece, at the telescope still aimed at the wall, and my grin vanished. My entire body went cold. Sitting on the polished wood, right next to the base of the telescope where it absolutely had not been before, was the observatory snow globe. In my haste, my panicked scramble to hide the will, I must have set it down and forgotten it. As my hand shot out to grab it, to hide the one piece of evidence that started it all, I heard the jingle of keys at the front door again. Aunt Carol's voice, no longer syrupy but sharp with suspicion, called up the stairs. "Alex, I forgot my purse. What is this thing on the mantel? I've never seen this snow globe before." My blood turned to ice water. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, to grab the snow globe and bolt, but I was rooted to the spot. Her footsteps were already on the stairs, quick and purposeful. She knew. Maybe not everything, but she knew something was wrong. That snow globe was an anomaly, a detail that didn't fit into the neat little box she'd put me in, and for a control freak like my aunt, an anomaly was a threat. "Oh, that?" I said, forcing my voice to sound casual, nonchalant. I walked out of the study and met her halfway up the stairs, physically blocking her path and her view of the study's interior. It was just in one of the boxes in the attic, part of the collection, I guess. It's a bit plain, isn't it? Her eyes, small and hard like a bird's, narrowed. She scanned my face, searching for a flicker of deceit. "I thought I knew every one of your grandmother's little trinkets. She loved to show them off. She never showed me that one." She tried to peer around me, craning her neck to see the mantelpiece. "Maybe she just got it recently," I offered, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "You know how she was." I gestured vaguely, hoping to distract her. "I was just packing them up." She hummed, a low, suspicious sound. For a terrifying second, I thought she was going to push past me. But then her gaze flickered to her purse, lying on the entryway table where she'd left it. The lure of her belongings, of getting on with her day, momentarily outweighed her suspicion. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "just make sure you're out by tomorrow. The appraisers need a clear space to work." She descended the stairs, snatched her purse, and with one last lingering look back at me, she was gone. The door clicked shut for the second time. I didn't move until I heard the sound of her car pulling away. Then I sagged against the banister, my legs shaking too badly to hold me. That was too close, way too close. I scrambled back into the study and grabbed the observatory snow globe, my fingers leaving sweaty prints on the glass. I couldn't leave it here. I couldn't leave anything to chance. My mind raced. I had the real will. But what good was it if I just walked into that lawyer's office tomorrow? It would be my word and a piece of paper against Carol and Mark. They would claim it was a forgery. They would drag it out in court for years, bleeding the estate dry with legal fees until there was nothing left for anyone. My grandmother had known that. Her letter said as much. "They will fight this with tooth and nail," she'd written. "You cannot simply reveal the will. You must reveal them. You must find the proof of their coercion. The weasel lawyer keeps impeccable records. Everything is dated, signed, and duplicated. The evidence you need is in his files. The second key I left you is not for a bank." I pulled the contents from the silver box again. The bank key was clearly labeled, but the other one, it was a strange, flat key with a complex, jagged edge. Stamped into its brass head was a small, barely there logo, a stylized eagle with a key in its talons, and beneath it, a name, Lockwood and Finch Secure Document Storage. It was an off-site archiving facility, the kind law firms use to store old case files. The second key wasn't for a bank, it was for her lawyer's private records, the Weasel's records. The final part of her letter contained the last piece of the puzzle. It was a sequence of numbers and a short, cryptic sentence. His mother's maiden name was Rosewood. He's sentimental that way. It was a password. My grandmother, in her final days, hadn't just been playing chess with me. She'd been playing it with her own family, and she was 3 moves ahead. She had laid a perfect trap. All I had to do was spring it. I spent the rest of the day carefully packing. I wrapped the snow globes and put them in a box, making sure the special one was tucked securely in my backpack. I packed up photo albums and a few of Grandma's books. I made it look exactly like I was doing what I was told, clearing out the worthless junk she'd left me. All the while, my mind was a whirlwind of planning. Lockwood and Finch. I looked it up online. It was a high-tech facility on the industrial side of town, open 24/7 for clients. I had the key. I had the password. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my small apartment, the silver box on the table in front of me. This was it. This was my one shot. If I got caught, I'd be facing breaking and entering charges on top of everything else. Carol would paint me as a disgruntled, thieving grandson, and any claim I had would be incinerated. But if I succeeded, I could honor my grandmother's last wish. I could save her home, her legacy, from their greedy hands. Just after 2 a.m., when the city was at its quietest, I drove to the industrial park. The Lockwood and Finch facility was a featureless concrete block of a building, surrounded by a high fence and covered in security cameras. My confidence wavered. This was insane. But the thought of Aunt Carol's smug face steeled my resolve. I walked to the glass entryway. As instructed in my grandmother's letter, I ignored the main desk and went straight to the automated client terminal. My hand shook as I inserted the key. The screen lit up, asking for a client number. I typed in the sequence from the letter. Then it prompted for a password. His mother's maiden name was Rosewood. I typed it in. Access granted. A heavy door buzzed and clicked open, leading into a long, sterile corridor lined with metal doors. My unit number, also from the letter, was at the very end. Unit 347. The air was cold and smelled of recycled air and old paper. I found the unit and used the same key on the lock. The door swung open smoothly, revealing a room lined wall to wall with gray archival boxes. Thousands of them. My heart sank. How was I supposed to find anything in here? But my grandmother was thorough. On the inside of the door, a small magnetic clip held a single sheet of paper. It was a layout of the room, a map, and one section was circled in red pen with the notation, Vance E. I hurried to the corresponding shelving unit and found the boxes. They were all meticulously labeled by date. I looked for the most recent ones, the ones from the last 6 months of her life. I found the box labeled Vance E. Estate Planning, Revisions, and my pulse quickened. I lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of files. I started digging through them, my flashlight beam cutting through the dusty dark. There were drafts of wills, notes from meetings, and then, at the very bottom, I found it. A separate file labeled Client Correspondence Confidential. My fingers trembled as I opened it. It was full of emails, printed out email chains between the lawyer and my Aunt Carol. The words leaped off the page, each one a nail in her coffin. Carol instructing the lawyer to emphasize her deteriorating mental state during meetings. The lawyer advising her on the best way to medically justify removing me from any significant inheritance. Carol describing how she would administer my grandmother's medication to ensure she was more agreeable before assigning. It was all there, in black and white, cold, calculated, and utterly damning. This was the proof. This was the weapon my grandmother had left for me. I gathered the file, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and elation. I had it. I had them. I quickly closed the box, turned to leave, and froze. The main door to the storage unit, which I had left wide open, was slowly creaking shut. It hadn't been a draft. Someone was closing it from the outside. I lunged for the door, my shoulder hitting the heavy metal just as the lock clicked home, plunging me into absolute darkness. A figure was silhouetted for a moment against the light of the corridor before the door sealed completely. It was my cousin, Brian, and he was holding my phone, which I now realized was missing from my pocket. "Looking for this, Alex?" His voice, muffled by the steel door, dripped with venom. "Aunt Carol figured you were too stupid to let things go. She had me follow you. Looks like she was right." Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed at me. I was trapped. The air in the unit was instantly thick and suffocating, the darkness absolute. I threw my shoulder against the heavy steel door, but it didn't budge. It was like hitting a brick wall. I could hear Brian laughing on the other side, a smug, triumphant sound that echoed in the corridor. "What do you want, Brian?" I yelled, my voice sounding small and desperate in the confined space. "What do I want?" he scoffed. "I want you to stop being a problem. Mom said you were snooping around. Guess she was right. So you just stay in there and cool off. We'll come back for you in the morning. By then, the appraisers will be at the house, and this whole mess will be over." I heard his footsteps fade away. Silence descended, heavy and terrifying. My mind raced. He had my phone. No one knew I was here. They were going to leave me locked in this airless box, walk away with everything, and paint me as the villain who broke in and got what he deserved. My grandmother's brilliant plan was about to fall apart at the final hurdle because of my own carelessness. Despair began to creep in, chilling me to the bone. I slumped against the door, the file folder clutched to my chest like a shield. "Think, Alex, think," I whispered, her voice echoing in my head. "Most people look, but they never truly see." I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. What had I missed? I couldn't call for help. I couldn't break down the door. I was trapped. But my grandmother had planned for everything. She knew they were ruthless. Would she have led me into a trap with no way out? No. There had to be something else. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, my fingers closing around the cool metal of the vault key. It was useless now. Then my fingers brushed against the small, hard shape of my car key fob. An idea, wild and desperate, sparked in my mind. The facility was a concrete box, but where was the parking lot? I tried to picture the building's layout from my brief time outside. The client entrance where I came in was at the front. The corridor I was in ran straight towards the back of the building. It was a long shot, a crazy shot, but it was the only one I had. I held my breath and pressed the panic button on my car keys. For a second, there was only silence. My heart sank. It was too far. The signal couldn't penetrate the concrete and steel. Then I heard it. Faint, so faint I almost thought I was imagining it, was the rhythmic, piercing honk, honk, honk of my car alarm. It was working. The back wall of the storage unit must have been close enough to the parking lot for the signal to reach. Hope surged through me. Brian was an idiot, but he wasn't stupid enough to leave a car alarm blaring at a secure facility at 3 a.m. He'd have to come back to shut it off, or it would attract the attention of security. I pressed the button again and again. The sound, a beautiful symphony of chaos in the dead of night. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Just as I was starting to think he had just driven away and left it, I heard the sound of running footsteps. "Turn it off, you moron." Brian's voice was a panicked hiss through the door. "Let me out, Brian," I shouted, my voice now strong with adrenaline. "Let me out, or I'll keep this up all night. Security will be here any second." "You're bluffing. There's no way you can—" He cut himself off. He must have realized how the alarm was going off. "Fine," he snarled. I heard the scrape of the key in the lock. The door flew open, and I practically fell out into the corridor, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. Brian stood there, his face pale with rage and fear. He lunged for my car keys, but I was faster. I sidestepped him and sprinted down the corridor, the file of emails clutched tightly in my hand. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the main entrance and into the cool night air. The sound of my still blaring car alarm, a sweet song of victory. The next morning, I didn't go to the family lawyer. I walked into the office of the most ruthless litigation attorney in the city, a woman whose picture I'd seen in the paper. I laid everything on her desk. The real will, my grandmother's letter, the key to the safe deposit box, and the stack of incriminating emails. As she read, her expression shifted from professional detachment to a slow, predatory smile. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice like velvet-wrapped steel, "I believe we have a very strong case." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My new lawyer filed an emergency injunction to halt the estate sale and freeze all of my grandmother's assets. She presented the real will for probate and submitted the emails as evidence of undue influence and conspiracy to commit fraud. Carol and Mark were served with papers during what was supposed to be their final walkthrough of the house, with the appraisers. Their weasel lawyer was slapped with a bar association complaint that ended his career. Their legal challenges crumbled. Faced with irrefutable proof of their deception, they had no choice but to fold. The court validated Grandma Eleanor's true will, and just like that, everything was mine. Brian, facing potential criminal charges for unlawful imprisonment, was forced to issue a public apology as part of a settlement. The first thing I did after the legal battle was over was walk back into my grandmother's house. It was no longer a crime scene or a battleground. It was home. I went up to the study and placed the observatory snow globe back on the mantelpiece, right next to the telescope. It wasn't a clue anymore. It was a trophy. A reminder that the greatest treasures aren't things that can be bought or sold, but the worlds we build with the people we love. I never spoke to Carol, Mark, or Brian again. They got the token amounts my grandmother had left them, a pittance compared to what they had tried to steal and faded from my life. I kept the house, filled it with my art, and made sure the attic remained a sanctuary of memories and dreams. I finally had the freedom my grandmother always wanted for me. Not just financial freedom, but the freedom to be myself, to chase my own constellations, knowing she was somewhere up there, watching. And every now and then, when the night is clear, I take out her old telescope, look up at the stars, and I don't just look, I see.